Breaking news from the South China Sea. The United States has just deployed warships to the Philippines in response to China's latest acts of aggression. Tensions are rising in the region, and the world is now watching closely. What exactly is happening in these contested waters? Why is the Philippines at the center of this growing storm between Washington and Beijing? And what could this mean for the balance of power in Asia? Today, we dive deep into the story behind America's naval deployment, China's rising pressure, and the Philippines' fight to defend its sovereignty. The immediate spark for the U.S. warship deployment lies in Beijing's increasingly aggressive behavior against the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, the portion of the South China Sea that falls within Manila's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. In recent months, China's Coast Guard and maritime militia have escalated their actions from harassment to outright dangerous maneuvers that risk lives at sea. One of the most alarming incidents occurred at the Second Thomas Shoal. This is a remote reef where the Philippines deliberately grounded the aging warship BRP Sierra Madre in 1999 to serve as a military outpost. To this day, a small group of Filipino Marines live aboard the rusting vessel, serving as a symbol of the country's sovereignty. China has long demanded that the Philippines remove the Sierra Madre, but Manila has refused. To maintain the outpost, the Philippines regularly sends resupply missions, small wooden boats carrying food, water, fuel, and personnel. But these missions have become increasingly dangerous. In August 2023, Philippine supply boats were intercepted by Chinese Coast Guard vessels, which used water cannons at close range. Videos released by Manila showed torrents of water smashing into the smaller Philippine boats, nearly sinking them and injuring several crew members. Beijing later defended its actions as necessary measures to block illegal operations, even though the shoal lies well within the Philippines' EZ. This was not an isolated case. In December 2023, another Philippine supply mission was blocked, with Chinese ships executing dangerous ramming maneuvers, causing damage to hulls and forcing Filipino sailors to take evasive action. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate attempts to intimidate and starve out the Philippine garrison. China's intimidation also extends to Filipino fishermen, many of whom have been driven out of their traditional fishing grounds near Scarborough Shoal, another hotly contested reef seized by China in 2012. The South China Sea is one of the most strategic waterways in the world. Every year, more than $3 trillion worth of global trade passes through its sea lanes. It is also rich in oil, natural gas, and fisheries, making it one of the most contested regions on Earth. China claims nearly all of the South China Sea under its so-called 9-dash line, a boundary rejected by international law. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines, declaring that China has no legal basis for its sweeping claims. But China has ignored that ruling. Instead, it has built artificial islands, fortified them with military runways, radar systems, and missile defenses, and deployed maritime militias to intimidate neighboring countries. For the Philippines, this has meant constant harassment of its fishermen, dangerous maneuvers against its Coast Guard vessels, and even water cannon attacks by Chinese ships. In response to China's latest aggression, the U.S. Navy dispatched a carrier strike group led by the USS Ronald Reagan to Philippine waters. Alongside the carrier are guided missile destroyers and cruisers equipped with advanced radar, anti-air, and anti-submarine capabilities. These warships joined joint patrols with the Philippine Navy, conducting freedom of navigation operations and escort missions for Philippine resupply ships. The U.S. has made it clear, any attack on Philippine armed forces, vessels, or aircraft in the South China Sea will trigger America's defense commitments under the Mutual Defense Treaty. This deployment is not just symbolic, it sends a direct message to Beijing that Washington is ready to back up its words with real military presence. Unsurprisingly, China condemned the move. Beijing accused the U.S. of interference and provocation, warning that American involvement only escalates tensions. China's state media claimed that the U.S. is using the Philippines as a pawn in its broader rivalry with Beijing. At the same time, Chinese warships and aircraft have been conducting their own exercises in the region, shadowing U.S. vessels and issuing radio warnings. But while China projects confidence, The presence of American warships complicates Beijing's ability to intimidate smaller neighbors without risking a direct clash with Washington. For the Philippines, U.S. support is a major morale boost. Filipino fishermen and Coast Guard personnel now feel less isolated in confronting China's massive fleet. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has reaffirmed his commitment to defending Philippine sovereignty, declaring that we will not give up a single square inch of our territory. His government has also filed multiple diplomatic protests against China and called for international solidarity. Public opinion in the Philippines has also shifted. Recent surveys show strong support for closer ties with the United States and growing distrust of China. For many Filipinos, the arrival of U.S. warships signals that their country is not alone in this struggle. This confrontation is not just about the Philippines. The South China Sea is a testing ground for the future of global order in Asia. For the United States, standing by the Philippines sends a message to other allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia that American commitments remain strong. For China, the stakes are equally high. Beijing wants to establish dominance over its near seas and push the U.S. further away from Asia. Allowing American warships to patrol unchallenged undermines that goal. The U.S. is not acting alone. Japan, Australia, and even European partners like France and the United Kingdom have expressed support for the Philippines. Joint naval drills, such as the Balikatan exercises, have grown larger every year, now involving not just the US and the Philippines but also other partners. In fact, Japan has begun supplying defense equipment to Manila, while Australia has pledged closer defense cooperation. But while deterrence is the goal, the situation remains extremely dangerous. The South China Sea is crowded with naval vessels, Coast Guard ships, and fishing boats. One miscalculation, one collision or accidental exchange of fire could trigger a wider conflict. If Chinese forces were to fire on Philippine or U.S. ships, Washington would be legally bound to respond. This could quickly spiral into a direct confrontation between the world's two most powerful militaries. That's why both sides are treading carefully, balancing shows of strength with attempts to avoid outright war. The U.S. warship deployment is a turning point. It signals that Washington will not allow China to bully its neighbors unchecked. For the Philippines, it's a reassurance that its sovereignty and maritime rights are backed by a powerful ally. But the long-term struggle over the South China Sea is far from over. China is unlikely to abandon its claims, and the Philippines will continue to face pressure. The question is whether deterrence will hold, or whether one day a clash will ignite a broader conflict that could drag the entire Indo-Pacific into crisis. The South China Sea is not just a distant maritime dispute. It is the front line of a great power rivalry shaping the 21st century. With U.S. warships now patrolling alongside Philippine forces, the balance of power in the region has shifted, at least for now. But tensions remain high, and the stakes could not be greater. Will this deployment be enough to prevent further Chinese aggression? Or are we witnessing the first sparks of an even larger confrontation in Asia? One thing is certain. The South China Sea will remain one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints for years to come.